Welcome, everyone. People are jumping in. I can see it's a little bit like the number count is scrolling up and up and up.
Hmm.
And I want to thank everybody who actually has been paying close attention to this session. I think we have about 700 or so people altogether who've expressed interest. And so we're just going to wait a few seconds because we're popping up to the 100 number. We'll probably begin once we sort of cross over the 100 line. I also want to thank our panelists and speakers who've joined us today. Really incredible that they were able to carve out some of their time. So we'll just begin in a few moments. John, you're busy contemplating, I can tell.
I'm looking down at my notes.
So
So
it's always good to have notes.
Gil, everything changes. Every day there's something new with AI and Gen AI. It's just fascinating that, if you have a slide deck that you try to keep current, you're always kind of adding that new slide or that new insight, or you're taking one out because it's no longer germane or right. So it is such a whirlwind of transformation now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, totally, totally, totally. And I think that, you know what, just as an aside before we begin, the numbers keep on climbing up. And I think we'll begin probably 9:03 just to give people a chance to log in and get going and obviously maximize the time. The three of you have been looking at this topic, and I'll be introducing you and talking about the topic. But the three of you have been looking at this topic in various forms for many, many years. And so while right now we're talking about Gen AI, this whole aspect has both an imaginative history and a practical history that we've been living through for. I would go as far as to say, although Lena and Meet may have some comment here. I think we've been living through this to this moment probably for about really, 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 in terms of the technological advances we've been making, I'm going to say close to 20 years. I mean, we've been talking about health information for close to 30 years in a very practical way. How do we
Mm.
assemble? How do we amass? How do we apply? How do we analyze? We've been talking about it for at least 30 years, seriously. But I think in terms of the technological advances we've made, I think that the past 20 years have been informative. Now I think what we've done is we've come up with a very clever brand, OpenAI, AI, Gen AI, and obviously the world has converged on anybody who is talking about health information for the last 20 years. But the three of you are really in the I'll say in the vanguard of how to operationalize mass amounts of information. So I think we're going to kick off. This is this is if this were the stock market and the numbers kept on going up, and this was where this panel was our investment, we would be absolutely thrilled. So I want to welcome all, and we're going to jump into a very hot topic that actually seriously affects billions of lives. It impacts one of the world's largest economic sectors, health. And obviously, the sector is known for advancing pioneering science, and yet it's bound by the chains of regulatory bodies. We just can't pursue the science as we would like. We have government agencies from around the world that also sort of bump into us and guide us of how we can apply the data, how we can learn from the data, how we can use the data, what does it mean in terms of the care of patients. Now, I'm going to be entering into conversation very soon with three recognized global leaders. Amit Bliweiss, thank you for joining us. Obviously, Lena Granovsky, thank you for joining us. And John Nosta, thank you for joining us. And I'm
Pleasure.
going to introduce you in a second, but there's a quiet lion in the room who doesn't need to roar, who I also want to introduce. And that's the person who's brought us all together today. Levi Shapiro is an ambassador for health innovation around the world. He's turned to the four of us and asked us if we would participate in the conversation. Levi, I want to thank you. You do more to impact the human condition than people on this call, people around the world can imagine. Special thanks to you for making this day happen. Yes, absolutely. He's deserving of a quiet applause by everybody on the call and everybody who will hear this video. Now, pharmaceutical companies have long been in the artificial intelligence vanguard. Remember big data? Well, how about machine learning? Before last year's news around OpenAI, life science researchers have been applying complex AI models to unlock disease mechanisms. Gen AI machine learning tools are helping us understand structures of nearly every known protein with the potential to transform the understanding of underlying disease. The new Gen AI use cases emerge. We understand the most promising areas five potential areas. And these are just the five potential areas that I look at. I'm certain that Lena and Amit and John are looking at other potential areas. Well, first of all, research and early discovery of molecules that might be applied to diseases, clinical development, operations, diagnosing hard to find or define diseases. And then how do we apply real world evidence that meets the chaotic electronic medical records? I think Gen AI is really going to be the key that unlocks many of those challenges. Now, Gen AI is most certainly transforming the pharmaceutical industry. And I think that Amit and Lena, you both live in that. One as a counselor to industry, and then Lena, of course, you're part of one of the world's largest biopharmaceutical companies. John, you serve as a global counselor to industry. Now, it's estimated that the technology, I just want to put a price tag on this. Amit, who's on the consulting side of this as well, and is obviously a sort of a senior player in the technology, might disagree or not. But I estimate that Gen AI will result in or actually generate about 60 billion to about $100 billion a year in economic value for the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. Now, I'm not going to hold their feet to the fire and explain how that's for other people to do. And maybe, John, you want to touch that on that. But it's going to help us identify compounds for new drugs. It's going to speed their development, and it's going to improve actually how they're marketed. So Gen AI has vast potential, vast potential. And today we're going to hear from three global leaders who really at the forefront of the conversation of making that happen. First of all, Amit, I've mentioned you many times. You're a senior data scientist at NVIDIA. You define the love for this category. Actually, I invite everybody listening in to this call to search out Amit's name. And you're going to find something extraordinary. Extraordinary. Amit has authored, I think, close to 30 or 40 serious articles, peer review articles that go back, I'd say, Amit, comfortably. I've seen articles of yours 15 years. Go back where you've been writing about this at least 15 years. And you've been looking at machine learning models. You've been looking at language models. You've been looking at actually patterns of human behavior, even. You've been looking at movement, you name it. You've been looking at how do we amass data and how does the human body fit into the scientific equation. Now, you bring to the company, to this conversation, to your company's clients, the agility of a startup entrepreneur. I think you've served as a leader in many startups. Obviously, you were in big tech. You were an executive at Intel, and now, of course, where you are right now with NVIDIA, you are a world leader in using AI to change sort of how do we look at speech recognition? How do we look at medical imaging? How do we improve the supply chain? You and the company are doing all those incredible things. And I know you're going to start off our conversation today with a brief 15-minute presentation of exactly what you and your colleagues are doing. Now, Lena, you're the director of artificial intelligence and machine learning at GSK. That's one of the world's largest biopharmaceutical companies. And obviously, the company is involved in many life-saving critical areas in cancer, respiratory disease, diabetes, vaccines, all of that. You're based in central Israel, but you're leading a worldwide team, if I'm not mistaken, of people who are all around the world. You're gathering them virtually and harnessing their talent to look at some of the disease areas. I think one of the areas of focus that you look at is oncology. Is that correct? So obviously, we're going to hear quite a bit about that in the conversation. You're going to start us off also with a brief video that you and GSK produced that explain what you're doing, but a little bit more about your background because I think it's fascinating. You combine a lot of different things. One, you have a vast love of this. You've been looking at machine learning since the genesis of companies being engaged and talking about it. You actually were involved with IBM Watson at one point. And then you did something tremendous that was one of the breakthrough areas of how we all connect and build community. You were involved at AOL. Then you moved over to one of the world's largest companies looking at both novel medications and looking how to perfect or improve access to care, Teva Pharmaceuticals. And now, of course, you play a very significant role at GSK. So I want to thank you for that. You've got an incredible background. I know that your love of this category dates back to your PhD at the Haifa Technion. So we're going to hear from someone who really is looking at how do you apply your love to saving people's lives. And of course, we have the one and only Professor John Nasta. John actually has been honored around the world. He has an honorary doctorate that has been given to him by universities, I believe in South America. Was it Sao Paulo, if I'm not mistaken, John? I'm close by. He's going to decide what university
No,
it is.
it was in Bolivia, a couple here and there.
Congratulations on that, of course.
Thank you.
You know, John is a scientist of humanity's potential. That's how I describe him. He is looking at how technology and humanity converge. He knows both extremely well. I would say that John has a innate ability to see around the corners of technology, science, medicine, and innovation. And his predictions are more often right than anything else. He is someone you have to listen to. John is the founder of Nasta Labs. It's a unique innovation think tank. He focuses on the future in a very practical way. He sets the path for companies to chart their destinies and get there to the fastest way possible and with great accuracy. Now, part of the magic is that John doesn't just focus on technology. He plugs in human behavior. Now, technology is one side of the equation, humanity is the other. John brings them together. He understands that culture ultimately sets the pace for innovation. The technology enables it, the humanity inhibits it. John tries to work that out. Now, you are a very sought after speaker, John, so thank you for joining us
My
this
pleasure.
morning. Incredibly appreciative that when you're not on the I know that you're leaving from this conference or this conversation. You're heading down to Florida, where you're actually going to be speaking about important aspects of rare disease and how innovation, technology, cognitive approaches to AI can actually help us resolve some of those challenges. So I want to thank you for that. Now, John, I highly recommend you follow John and Amit and Lena. All of them are on social media platforms, X and LinkedIn. They've agreed as part of this program to allow you to follow them on all those platforms. This is your moment to do that. John, I think you have more than 500 publications, if I'm not mistaken. You're a columnist for Psychology Today, focusing specifically on large language models, AI, Gen AI, and so forth. I know you have a hot article coming out today, a little bit of a preview.
Okay.
I'm going to see if I can tease you out and break that. So, John, thank you.
My
Amit,
pleasure.
thank you. Lena, thank you. Amit, I want to begin with you. You were kind enough to prepare a presentation for us with your colleagues. I thought we'd start off there. Let's get a grounding in the technology, and then we can go, Lena, see your video, and then into group conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gil. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, great. So I think the first thing to do is to define what generative AI is, because there's a lot of hype, and there's been a lot of hype on AI in general, but generative AI is kind of a newcomer to the hype field. And we need to first understand how it's defined within the larger context of AI, machine learning, deep learning. We're throwing around all this taxonomy, and we need to first define what it means. So everyone knows what generative AI is. I think everyone on this call probably has used ChatGPT. My son is in 4th grade. He uses ChatGPT all the time. And there are basically all the big industry leaders, whether it's us at NVIDIA, Google, Meta, Microsoft, everyone's pushing generative AI, whether it's in software or hardware. And we know it's definitely having a moment. And the first question is, how do we define generative AI? So if we look at artificial intelligence, it's been around for decades. That's nothing new, but it hasn't been very popular, let's say, until about a decade ago or 15 years ago. General AI is basically how can we solve a task or teach a computer to mimic human behavior. Within that is machine learning, which in practice is what we've been using for about 20 or 30 years. So there, what we would do is we'd look at the data and then spend most of our time on feature engineering. So if we want to detect a face, we look at a whole bunch of face images or videos, and then we try to understand and define functions based on those and actually code or write up functions to define those features, right? So if it's a face, we define a feature to detect a nose or eyes and so on and so forth. That was the world of machine learning, and obviously many of the techniques are still used today. And then about 10 years ago or so, we have deep learning, which was enabled based on several parameters, which I'll discuss. And here, intuitively, the difference is instead of doing this feature engineering, we can, in a sense, take the data as it is and throw it into this big neural network, and then we'll get a result. Obviously, I'm simplifying, but it does away with a lot of the feature engineering complexities that we had to deal with in the past. And within the world of deep learning now is generative AI. And the big difference between generative AI, or the subset there, is that now we're able to generate content. So it still uses deep learning. It's a subset of deep learning, but think of it as intuitively as generating the content to help us. So why is that important? So we can take any type of data, whether it's text, audio, video, images, even source code, programming, and we're able to generate completely new artifacts which are similar. And this has a lot of this gives us a lot of opportunities, because in the past we'd have to hand code a lot of that stuff or create it ourselves, and now it's all generated for us. And it's a big time saver, and specifically when we talk about healthcare, it's super important because of the data. So when we talk about customization, if we think about it intuitively, think about a chat GPT, right? If we look at the number of, at this big box here with less customization, so we're able to take a model and we no longer have to feed it all this data. We can just prompt it the way you do with chat GPT, right? So we can just prompt and over time teach it just by interaction. We no longer have to have even a deep learning engineer, a data scientist do this work. Anyone can do it. But for productization work, that's usually not enough. And certainly in healthcare, domain expertise is critical. So we need the next level, which is the moderate customization. And here what we do is we do fine tuning. So I spoke about deep learning in the past where we have masses of data that we just push through. Now we can do the same with a much smaller amount of data. So think about it as prompting or prompt engineering with much less data. But again, the interface is much simpler than what we had to do, let's say, 10 years ago. And then we have here in the smallest box, we have extensive customization. So sometimes we do have to customize to a level where we actually need to use some of the older techniques. So think about this kind of umbrella of possibilities when we use generative AI, all the way from the simple prompting that we do day to day to the other end of the spectrum where we do this kind of training and tuning of a model. So in order to deploy generative AI, we need three things. We need accelerated computing, because we obviously, no matter what technique we use, we need a lot of hardware. We need a lot of memory, because these models, large language models, they're rightfully called large because they're huge. So they require a lot of memory, a lot of compute. We definitely need tools and for training and for inference. And we need the AI expertise. And I'd add on, for this domain, for healthcare, we need the domain expertise even more than the AI expertise, because today we have the tools, we have amazing tools, but we need domain experts. And that's part of the main problem with the classic deep learning approach, is that we have in the healthcare world, we have plenty of data everywhere. But when we actually want, as data scientists, to take that data and do something with it, then there are several challenges. One is that data is often not centralized or organized. And the bigger challenge is that it's not annotated. So if I have millions of radiology images that are not marked in some sense, I can't really do much with them, or at least I couldn't until a few years ago. And the other thing that we need to do for the medical domain is we need to tune, right? So ChatGPT is not going to do for electronic health records. We're going to have to tune it, whether by prompting, as I said before, or perhaps additional tuning. We have really high resolution images. We have multi-view images. We have volumes. So how do we handle all those with generative AI? Anyone that has worked with healthcare data, if you want to look at emergency room tables, then you'll see that there's lots of missing values. So how do we handle those? That's a great place where generative AI really helps us out, because again, it generates the data and fills in those missing pieces correctly. Whereas in the past, we'd have to use all kinds of statistical approaches, which were often would oversmooth the data or hurt the actual end results. And finally, we have other considerations like explainability. So in the old machine learning days, we're able to explain because we were able to look at trees, decision trees, and understand where the decisions were made. But now with this huge neural network, how do I explain how I reach these results? And this is important for FDA for many other reasons. And finally, ethical implications, right? So how ethical and responsible is the model? It's not enough just to spit out a result, but we need to make sure that ethics are in space and that the results are responsible. A little bit about data. So one of the big challenges inherent in this domain in healthcare is that, as I said, we need domain expertise for the data annotation. So if I have millions of images, I still need radiologists to go through these and mark them. And often radiologists would disagree. Looking at the same image, you'll get several opinions. So how do you feed all that into an algorithm? That's one place where generative AI really helps us out, because technically what we can do here is we build a foundation model based on data that's not annotated, and then we can fine tune it on a much smaller data set where radiologists actually went and did the work. So it's a big enabler here in this domain. Whereas in the past, it would be impossible. You couldn't have radiologists just sit and mark these images all day. Now, what drove the whole generative AI revolution is really from natural language processing. And it started back in 2017 with, that's when the transformer model came about. And that's basically the foundation of what's in ChatGPT today. And these models, as you can see here in the graph, just grow and grow. These are the number of parameters. So they just grow exponentially over time. And in fact, to get ChatGPT working, it took about 10,000 NVIDIA GPUs running for weeks just to get that foundation model ready. And then from that point on, we can all use and prompt it. But the important understanding is to get this up and running takes considerable hardware resources and memory and such. And essentially, these large language models are the foundations for everything we do today. So whether it's in computer vision, applying to radiology images, applying to genomics, no matter which domain, we use the same concept, this transformer or large language model concept. One example is in the language domain is retrieval augmented generation. If you haven't heard about RAG, look it up. It's a very popular technique for today, where you can take a large language model, like what's used in ChatGPT, and you don't need to train it. You basically feed in documents into this model and giving it, basically injecting additional knowledge. And then you get results which are, they have knowledge of the domain, right? So for example, if you want to discover information based on electronic health records, you can imagine here that a physician wants to ask a question about a specific patient. Let's say, does this patient require biological therapy? We don't have to actually go and spend weeks and thousands of GPUs training a new large language model. All we have to do is use this RAG technique to pre-process these documents and drive them all into a separate database where that information is injected to a large language model. So that's also a big benefit, especially important for healthcare, where you want to take a model and you don't necessarily want to have data scientists do the work. You can just build an application based on your existing knowledge base. And the same can happen in imaging as well. I spoke about that a little bit, but imagine the way you prompt a chat GPT, doing the same with images, right? So imagine you want to, let's say, look for diseases in the abdomen. We can prompt a chat GPT like model, but feed it in images. So we'd feed in a few of these images and say, look, disease so-and-so is apparent in these images. We'll throw in a few of those prompts, and then over time, intuitively, that works like ChatGPT. You'd have a model that essentially is tuned for this specific use case, and you could do that for all these different diseases. And I spoke about missing data. So if you look at any data in medicine, whether it's lab data or emergency room tests, or basically any table that's in healthcare, you'll always have a lot of missing data. You can see here in the top right, the missing is in the darker color. So how do you fill in those images? And that's where the generative aspect is super important, and really a game changer, because in the past, using different statistical techniques didn't really do it. It really smoothed out the results, and it didn't give the right information. And of course, drug discovery. So if you heard about AlphaFold 2, and you can see the improvements here, you can think about a protein sequence as language as well, right? We can look at it as a sentence and then use the same foundation models there. And that's another place where we have some major advances. And finally, at NVIDIA, we have a toolkit for healthcare called Clara. And we have several different tools. I'm going to highlight the generative AI specific tools. So BioNemo is what I just discussed. It's basically a service that allows you to input protein sequences and outputs the generated structures, and also use many other biology use cases. So this is available as a service, or you could run it on-prem as well. We have Monai, which is a tool for imaging. So for all the imaging needs and applying Gen AI there, it could be videos, it could be images. And then we have Nemo, which is for large language models using for natural language processing, again, like the RAG technique that I described before, and tuning of LLMs for any domain. So these are all available, and there's some additional tools here, which I'm not going to discuss because they don't really fall under the Gen AI topic. But again, these are all available as part of this Clara umbrella. And I put some links here and additional resources. We'll share the presentation afterwards so you can access all these. And I just want to mention that we also have a program for startups that you can sign up, and then you get access to additional blogs on generative AI. We have a lot of training material on this information, specifically on large language models and prompting techniques and such. And finally, we have the big GTC conference coming up. So that's my last plug.
Amit, where will the conference be held?
The conference is physically in San Jose, California, but it's also virtual.
So I recommend to all of our listeners, go to the site, please, and consider signing up. You can hear from Amit that this is an incredibly, where the rubber meets the road process right now. And Amit is one of the leaders of that. Amit, thank you. And also thank you for sharing the presentation later on with our attendees. So we're going to move over to Lena. And Lena, I know that you and your colleagues at GSK prepared a video for us to see, a short video. I want to thank you for that. I think that you and Amit are providing a great service to the community. We often talk about this theoretically with great imagination. The imagination of what AI, Gen AI, large language models can do, practically speaking. But it's very hard for people to conceptualize that this is a very much a practical discipline that actually applied, and you may agree or disagree, but has the potential to accelerate treatments for people and potentially save lives and reduce costs. So I want to thank you both for taking time out to do this. Lena, would you share some words, please, and introduce the video?
Sure. So thank you very much, first of all, for the very flattering introduction, and also thank you for inviting me for this forum. Um, as you mentioned in your introduction, I joined pharma from different technological companies. And the first thing that I learned after joining the pharmaceutical domain is that it takes 10 to 15 years to bring drug to market. Success rates are low, costs are billions, and development becomes harder and harder because easy and obvious drugs have been already discovered. So it made me wonder if I'm at the right place even. But then when I started learning about the drug development processes, and the more I learned, the more I became excited being in this domain, because I realized how much impact AI can make on each and every step of drug development process. And you mentioned this in your introduction, Gil, but I think that really from the early stage target drug discovery to preclinical, clinical development, the whole way to post-marketing of approved drug, like everything can be improved using AI and using generative AI. So, another thing that I want to mention, everyone is talking about the AI revolution and generative AI revolution, but I think that's additional thing that happened in the biological world is that it has been a revolution in the world of gene editing and also revolution in the world of technologies for deep cellular phenotyping. So today we can measure tens of thousands of different quantities, even at the level of a single cell, and do it all at the reduced cost. So here is another opportunity when machine learning and deep learning and generative AI can learn all this huge amount of information and try to relate all these complicated and very non-linear functions that can connect cell level to patient level. Today, we also have a large amount of clinical data from patients. There are a lot of advancements in imaging technologies. So now when you take all these different modalities and use AI and use generative AI, you can analyze all this together and learn a lot of interesting things about the disease. Saying that we are today talking about generative AI and talking about generative AI, that means that we should talk about large language models. And I do want to show you an example of a very cool tool that was developed internally by GSK team. It is a GTP power tool. It is called Jules OS. So it's actually the research analyst assistant. It helps to bring immediate impact. So if you think about developing drugs, it takes a while. We are working on that, and we are already having a lot of impact. But this is something that can provide impact immediately. So it's actually a tool that enables any scientist to easily run analytical investigations without need to code. And the unique thing is it uses both external and GSK's proprietary internal data sets. It connects seamlessly to GSK data ecosystem. So, I worked for many large companies, and probably people who work for these companies knows that the amounts of data are huge, and nobody in the company really knows what data is there and how. And it's it's time consuming to find the right data. So, using these kind of tools and connecting seamlessly to the correct sources of internal and also external information is a huge advantage. So Jules OS, it actually has the AI agent component, which is a software component which can determine how to perform a particular task. It has LLM, which acts as a kind of a brain for the agent. And in this case, we also leverage our proprietary LLMs, which are pre-trained on scientific literature. And again, this complements the existing commercial and open source projects. So the thing is that this agent breaks down a complex question into a series of smaller steps Basically, it's kind of creating a plan and presenting it to the user. Now, everyone is again talking about hallucinations and things that generative AI create, not necessarily correctly. So, with having this plan, we are not aiming to replace the work of our staff, but the agents actually show the working of all the stages. And then the user can validate the plan and validate the results and dynamically modify it and review both the plan and the results. So we make sure that it's not hallucinating, it's creating a consistent and reliable plan. So with that, I'll be happy to run the video.
We're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Adrian. In this demo, JulesOS answers a question about the industry's top-selling drugs. So, let's get started. On the landing page of JulesOS, the user can enter the query, what is the revenue of the 10 top-selling drugs that target proteins highly expressed in the liver? JulesOS immediately gets to work, formulating a plan. Please note, for this demo, inference times have been sped up. Once this process is complete, JulesOS describes its plan and the reasoning behind it. On the right-hand side of the screen, the sequential steps of this plan are shown in a minimap. Below the plan, JulesOS asks me if I would like to continue to the first step. I respond yes to move forward. Next, JulesOS begins executing the first step to get me all proteins highly expressed in the liver. Results are streamed back in real time, and I can see the progression on the minimap. Here, I can see that JulesOS decides to retrieve the genes dataset, then designs a SQL query to extract the relevant data. You can see that JulesOS is filtering for proteins expressed in the liver. A preview of this extracted data is also provided. Since this looks good, I'm going to click to proceed to the next step, which is get me the drug-protein interactions for all drugs. In this case, JulesOS retrieves drug data and again designs a SQL query to extract the data. This is successful, so I again proceed to the next step of the plan, which is get me sales information for all drugs. By inspecting the minimap, I can see that this will be the last data extraction step to complete. This also looks good. Therefore, I will click to proceed to the final step. Now this is the big one, where the magic happens. Here, JulesOS analyzes and reasons about the extracted data to answer my initial question. It writes and executes its own Python code, debugging it as necessary along the way. I can see that JulesOS starts by breaking this data wrangling exercise down into a series of sub-steps. The first sub-step is to merge the extracted gene data with the extracted drug data. JulesOS provides a sample of the output data for our review. The results look good. Let's continue. The next sub-step is to merge the extracted sales data. On first try, this join resulted in an empty data frame, indicating that the approach failed. This can sometimes happen due to naming conventions, so I asked to normalize the names. All uppercase letters are converted into lowercase, and any leading or trailing white space is removed. Looking good? Let's continue. The final step sorts the table by the total reported sales in 2022 and returns the top 10. This looks okay, but I want to ensure target protein names are displayed alongside each drug and the associated sales data. You can see the plan is updated on the fly. I click yes to proceed with the plan. Finally, we get to our answer. Jules OS has created a list of the top 10 selling drugs that target proteins highly expressed in the liver. We have a well-reasoned, data-driven answer to our question. I want to emphasize that this result was automatically generated without me needing to know about GSK's data ecosystem or having the ability to code. We believe this tool has real potential for augmenting the abilities of our scientists to make a step change in research productivity at GSK. Thank you for watching this demo.
Lena, I want to thank you for sharing this demo. You know, the reality is, you know, as I said earlier, we're often talking about this in a theoretical way. And Jules operating system really shows us, Jules AI operating system shows us the practical nature of this, similar to what Amit was sharing. So I'm going to be asking some questions about this. Is there anything you want to say about the video before we move into the panel? And for our audience, I just want to say that we're going to extend this conversation another 10 minutes to 9:10 so that we have sufficient time for conversation. Also, many of you are using the Q&A section. You're asking very specific questions, and I've already advised our panelists to check the Q&A section and to make sure that your questions can be answered. Lena, anything else you wanted to add about the video?
Not about the video, but maybe just to emphasize again that I really think that GSK believes that AI can be a game changer for medicine. So what we do using generative AI and other tools of AI, we analyze vast sets of biological, genetic, and clinical data from different modalities. You know, this really helps our scientists to the next big breakthrough. It's a large team. We are located across the globe in London, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, Philadelphia, Switzerland, Germany, and of course Tel Aviv. And this is a team that I'm really, really proud to be a part of. A team of excellent AI researchers with background in machine learning, physics, neuroscience. And we are mostly working on discovering new medicines in precision oncology here in Israel. So really amazing team and amazing place to work.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to start off, we're going to kick right into our panel conversation now. I'm going to start off with John Nasta. And then I'm going to ask Amit to listen in very closely to John's thoughts. I'm going to turn to you next. John, you really have been one of the pioneers that has looked at this technology from a very different way, not the coding way. You appreciate the application, but you also understand there's a cognitive, a psychological component to this. And, you know, one of the fears I have, and fear doesn't mean that it will happen. It's you know, it's sort of like an imaginative anxiety. But what I see in the technologies, we've become more sophisticated, is that it requires us to create people like Amit and Lena who can appreciate the technology, understand it, and apply it wisely. What do you think the cognitive implications are as we continue to push the envelope on technology? Can we push the ability of the mind to comprehend what we're doing and analyze it? I mean, that's the Achilles heel here, I think.
Gil, it sounds like it was scripted, and I just want to ensure everybody that these comments are all spontaneous. I sent Gil an email today, and I said, Gil, are there questions? He said, no, we want this to be a spontaneous discussion. And the three of you, each one of you hit words that are so germane to the broad philosophical construct here to me. And Amit said mimic. And I think that's part of what's happening here. Yet mimic is reflected in what we heard in Lena's video, where there was another M word. That M word was magic. These are not my words. These are your words. And finally, what we saw is mimic went to magic and came to mind, the word that you used here. And I think that's where we live today. We are moving from the industrial age, the gears, and the steam engine through the digital age. And how many of us have spent time talking about digital transformation? We still do. We have to digitize this, we have to digitize that. But what we're seeing now is in the introduction of large language models is the emergence of the cognitive age. That I believe that we are now at a point where Voltaire said, as you think, so you act. The context of today is as you think, so you create. And in essence, what we're having emerge to us is kind of like the bicycle. The bicycle gave us speed and power to move, and large language models is a cognitive bicycle that allows us to push in directions that expand our cognitive function. So to me, I think that we are at a profound fundamental change. Now, here's the interesting thing about this. Innovation has always been linked to one other word, and it's a word that frightens us, but it's a good word. It's obsolescence. That we've known throughout history as innovation takes a foothold, the old ideas, the old methodologies, the old modalities become obsolete, and that's fine. We get a better stove, we get a faster car, we get more efficient engines, and we say goodbye to those areas of transformation, those inflection points of transformation. They become functionally obsolete. Not gone, they're still there. We still like to use an old-fashioned device sometimes. But the interesting thing here is that for the first time in human history, obsolescence is being connected to human cognition. And that is fundamentally profound. We have thinking machines now that can think in ways that humans can't. And not only do they think differently, they have a perceptual reality mediated by multimodal LLMs to interpret and analyze multidimensional realities that really step beyond humanity. So for me, it is functionally in the domain of the cognitive age. So that's where I think we are.
Yeah.
And I think we have to recognize that that's going to make us smarter, better, and quite interesting as humans.
Yeah, John, I'm going to take that. That was pretty important comment right now. And Amit, I want to go back to you. I've been looking at your writings going back. Well, I've just gotten back right now to 2013. I have a little more to go. And you've been looking at sort of humanity, both, sort of like in the N of one and in the composite. And you've been using that, whether it's movement, whether it's language, you've been studying human behavior in order to build your models. So you're not far off from John. I don't think you disagree with John, but you're the other end of the bookend of John. He's looking at the cognitive age. You're applying the cognitive age to technology. I wanted to ask you, when you're sitting at NVIDIA and you're looking at creating technology or platforms for pharmaceutical companies, for instance, how do you reconcile the technology with the humanity? Because I think you do both. How do you take a look at how humanity fits in to these large learning models that you're creating?
So I think
I know I'm putting you on the spot right now, but
sure,
why not?
it would have been so much easier with
moderator.
like a geeky tech question. But yeah, I think I alluded this to a little bit in my presentation. So the whole aspect of explainability and responsibility has to be factored into the models. So part of the problem is that we're moving really fast and we're working in a sense in a brute force manner, right? We're churning out all these models. We have amazing results, but are we able to introspect and walk through these neural networks now and understand and explain why they made that decision? Are we able to make sure that there isn't too much bias embedded in that model? Are we making sure it's making responsible decisions? That all fits in the same bucket, which has to be resolved. And that's one area of research in machine learning and deep learning, which actually has become much more of a challenge, because back in the machine learning days, it was much easier for me to answer that question. I'd be able to look through this decision tree visually and understand why it made that decision, and also say, okay, there's too much bias here, right? Let's say I have particular data. I have too much data on one side, and I have too much bias, and I'm making a decision which is irresponsible. So actually, it's become more challenging as we moved from machine learning to deep learning, and now with Gen AI, right? I have this huge model with billions of parameters. How can I explain it? How can I explain why it made that decision? So that's one very important area of research, which basically answers all those questions, whether it's ethics, responsibility, explainability. It all has to be with how do we take these models now to the next level and get that information out in a way that's intuitive.
Yeah, it's
You know,
a tough issue. Hold on to that second, one second, John. We're going to swing back to you in a moment. Lena, um, I mentioned early in my comments that I felt that the technology, Gen AI, ChatGPT, LLMs, could have an economic impact on the biopharmaceutical industry. I threw out a number, $60 billion to $100 billion in sort of added resources to the company. And I was reflecting on sort of the Jules AI OS system and your comments about pulling people together around the world. I wanted to ask you a behind the curtain question, if I could. You have colleagues that you participate with, you guide, that sit all around the world, and you're looking at these systems together. You're trying to make decisions. I, I wanted to ask you operationally, how really has Gen AI pulled together the diverse components of this massive biopharmaceutical company? I think GSK is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the top 5 life science companies in the world. So from an operational standpoint, there's not only the technology now, there's brilliant data scientists like yourself that sit in different capital cities, major cities around the world. When you're on the video screen together and you're going through the system and the data, could you give us a sense of what is one of those conversations like without disclosing any proprietary data?
Yeah, so
I think
you know,
you
let
own the
me.
word magic, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, right,
yes.
John?
Yep.
So obviously you're trying to create magic. You're trying to put the pedal down on drug development so that the company can realize that savings and bring life-saving therapies to people who need them desperately faster. What's the conversation like?
So I think that during my couple of years in the pharmaceutical domain, there has been a transformation of various stakeholders and their understanding and acceptance of AI/ML models. I think that AI/ML is not a kind of a magic. It is very important for us to explain once we talk and we have these conversations with different stakeholders across the organization, what these models do, how are they built, what are the inputs to the model, are there any biases? And we are very, very transparent about that also. Are there any biases? These are things that these models can do, and there are some other things that these models cannot do. So I think that once we explain the advantages and also the disadvantages of the models, the acceptance across the organization is huge. And when talking about saving a lot of money, I think it's in the short term maybe goes into more productivity efforts. So for example, generating new trial protocols, working with regulators, looking at patient safety and patient data. So doing all these in the very short term more efficiently, but also stakeholders in drug discovery, where it's not just about generating new drugs, but it's also sometimes stopping or evaluating the current targets and drugs in development and bridging between what we see across different systems, cell models, and clinical data, and trying to understand what are the success rates of the specific targets in the future, And sometimes, even stopping the development earlier can save a huge amount of money.
Yeah, I was
So I
thinking
think,
what you just said, Lena, about huge amounts of money. We just want to sort of add to the question quickly, which is um, the unintentional delight of failing fast.
yes.
Does that happen as a result of this?
Yes, definitely. I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is to understand as soon as we can what is the success rate, understand the toxicity, understand if if there are even patients that can benefit from the drug. Are there going to be any adverse events to maybe in the future to these drugs? And understanding this earlier can make and help us make important decisions going forward. Again, it's each of the steps of the long process of drug development.
Thank you, thank you, John. You've been sort of like holding onto your desk, like I can't
I'm
wait. We gotta
biting
share
my
this.
pen.
Okay, I can see your pen like moving furiously. Share with us what your pen is telling us.
My
I
pen,
know
my
it is.
my pen is
Is
telling
your
me.
pen, by the way, empowered by Gen AI? Is it really you
No,
moving the
no,
pen,
no.
or
I am
the
empowered by
I?
Gen AI, and that's my point. That's very much my point. I want to shift the light off of the black box, okay? And I want to shift it to this thing called humanity. Because interestingly, number one, failing fast is wrong. That's old school methodology. Today we fail smart. We fail smart. And that's so, so important because Gen AI makes me smarter. We always talk about how the system is smarter, or we mimic, or we magic, or no. Gen AI, my morning conversation with LLMs makes me smarter. I can interrogate it and have a Socratic dialogue. This is fundamentally transformative. In the context of medicine and pharma and science, it allows me to do three things. And everybody always talks about the two. Number one, it allows me to think faster. It allows me to think smarter. But there's a third element here, which is extraordinary, and that is it engages me, and I find a level of personal fulfillment in the context of Maslow's hierarchy. One of the big problems with medicine, and even with those postdocs in the lab, they do a lot of grunt work and they find their jobs unfulfilling in many instances. Yet when they find the spark, when they find the magic, they have a sense of fulfillment. Clinicians who are encumbered by technology and an EHR that spends too much time for input doesn't feel empowered. That's the magic of LLMs here. LLMs empower me to find a new self-actualization, self-realization. So that's the magic. People in pharma who use LLMs think smarter. It activates, it stimulates, and it shines the light on the genius within.
John,
the genius isn't in the box.
when you were saying this, and I was thinking, of course, Jules AI OS, and I could imagine as you were speaking right now, and Lena had shared her video that GSK has produced for us to see. I could imagine you entering the questions or the dialogue in the dialogue box. So I just a part two to this for a second.
Let me just
Because
interrupt real quick, Gil.
I'm just worried, not worried. That's not. I'm wondering in terms of your delight of engaging large language models.
Yeah.
Is the Jules AI really a superpowered tool in the arms of the scientist, of the computer scientist, of the biological scientist, of the cognitive scientist who knows how to enter into dialogue with the machine?
Take a large language model, a generic off-the-shelf large language model, and compare it to a model that has been fine-tuned on clinical data. Okay? The large language model that is generic, that has not been fine-tuned, that is asked a well-articulated prompt, has been shown to do better. What does that mean? That we don't run around chasing the tuning, we chase the prompt, and the prompt is a cognitive construct. Now, this is an evolution, things are going to change here, but a well-articulated prompt that is asked in the context of cardiovascular pathophysiology or ST segment elevation, or is put contextually, stimulates these LLMs. So again, the LLM is connected to me viscerally and stimulates my cognitive function, making me think better, think smarter. That makes the LLM have better output.
So Amit, I'm going to jump over to you for a second, because one of the things I noticed in the work that you do is it's not just that you're sort of a wizard in designing these models, that I think you and John and Lena are very much interconnected. I was wondering, as you were describing what you're doing and what John just was talking about, if you're a master of the supply chain of the market's needs, and you're studying what the need is and developing the model, but you have a great appreciation for how the human mind thinks and the ability of the users to actually conceptualize how to apply the model. Could you go into the design room for me a little bit, into your head for a moment? Because I could see your eyes as John was speaking. Your eyes were getting bigger and bigger.
He was just getting angry, Gil.
No, he wasn't. I thought John Amit was so identifying with your comments. Share with us what you were thinking about when John was talking.
Yeah, I think it's very closely tied to the progression of what happened in the AI world, because in the past, we'd work as data scientists, right? As I explained, we have to define the features, so we can do that all by ourselves. I have a radiology image. I talk to a physician a little bit, and then I spend a lot of time trying to design an algorithm from scratch. And over time, we have these great models, existing models, and now we have foundation models, right? So we have models that we can just tune. And as John said, we focus on the prompts.
Yeah.
So the future of this domain, and what I've been seeing for the way I've been working for the past few years, the big change is the tight collaboration. And in other words, you can't do this alone anymore. Like I can imagine the future hospital always having a data scientist and a physician.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have one or the other. And I think that's something in the past that you could have argued that's not necessary. But today, if you have a prompt, how do you design that prompt? You have to have the domain expertise. And that's not just in medicine, right? If we were to go into finance, you need to have a domain expert to know how to iron out these prompts. By the way, the prompts have a limit as well, right? So if you work with ChatGPT, you can't just copy paste like huge novels, right? They have a context size. And how do you fit the prompt within the context size? So I think the future of this world is going to be much less kind of classic engineering, much more closer collaboration between domain experts and engineers. And the interface will be much more like these prompts, right? In a sense, less technical, more collaborative, and more intuitive.
There's another wow there. Hold on a second, John. I'm going to flip over to Lena for just 1 second and get right back to you. Lena, your background, I was thinking about what John was talking about, what Amit was talking about. Now I look at your backgrounds. You don't have a lifelong attachment to the life science industry. You certainly have a lifelong attachment to information technology. I mean, your work with IBM Watson, your work with AOL, all of that has led up to this moment with GSK. Could you share with us how much of the skill you have to apply comes from your work with Teva and GSK and understanding the culture and the environment and the goals, and how much of it comes from sort of seeing the application of these technologies in different environments? When you're sitting there and your mind is processing away, what's the next step? How much of the brain is occupied around the technology, around Gen AI, and how much of the brain is occupied around sort of biological science?
So, the experience, my main experience is in technology. And when you think about the basics of machine learning, basics of artificial intelligence, basics of statistics, they hold across different domains. But there is a lot of fine tuning and a lot of things that you need to understand when you move from one domain to another domain. And, speaking about future of generative AI, And just to refer to a question, just want to give you one example of how you can take this technology, which was developed for a natural language or images, and how you can transform this technology into a life science, for example. So, I mentioned the technology revolution that happened with the next generation sequencing, where you can simultaneously sequence millions of DNA fragments in parallel, and you can do it at a single cell level. So at the end, today, you have millions of single cell data where you have gene expression for every gene, and you can think of these gene expression vectors as new types of sentences. And when you think about these sentences that show you different expression of genes, you can think, oh, maybe these can be kind of words, and these words, they are somehow correlated to each other. There are gene-gene interactions. So the question that I'm asking, moving to this domain from different technologies, can we use similar types of transformer-based models or LLM-based models, which are trained on a large amount of language model? Can we train them on single cell gene expression data? And can this provide us the deep understanding of gene-gene interactions? Can we then take these learnings and fine-tune them, similar to what we do in LLMs and similar to what John was referring to? Can we fine-tune them to solve specific tasks, which we can use for smaller amounts of label data, for example, predict response to some drug, where we don't have this huge amount of data. So I think this is an example of how you take your knowledge, which is kind of a basis across different domains, but apply it wisely to a specific domain that can be of interest.
Thank you for that. So in the brief time we have left, I wanted to ask you each for a takeaway point. Gen AI, there's no debate about it. Gen AI can transform biological science. It can transform the health system. And I wanted to get your take from your perspective on what you perceive the big changes will be in the next 2 years, if you can, because this is, I think we're at the practical stage. We've been very aspirational in the past. I think Gen AI, large language models are practically applied. So if you could really just guide us and say, folks, pay attention to this. John, pay attention to what?
Pay attention to the fact that we are moving to personal LLMs, that we don't live in the cloud. We have something on our laptops that are uniquely connected to us. So I have a personal LLM that could have my clinical data on it. It could have a record of protein folding information, but it's going to be part of me. And that's the interesting thing, a personal LLM that I can interrogate or someone else can interrogate. And in the final analysis, it's been said, the ancient wisdom still stands true today. Socrates and his Socratic dialogue, which is what we do with an LLM. And one of my famous quotes is, as we think, so we act. As we act, so we become. As we think. We are in the cognitive age, and we are stimulating human cognition mediated by AI and LLMs.
John, thank you for that. I think Amit wrote all that down. He's going to use that. As soon as this panel is over, he's going to run outside and claim that for himself. Amit, what do you think we have to focus in on?
So I think the healthcare industry has been kind of slow to adopt AI in practice. And one of the things that I've been seeing over the past few years is how it's been embraced, and physicians understand that it's not going to replace them, but rather empower them. So this should have a major effect on healthcare. I believe in the next 2 years, we'll see hospitals change. We'll see smart hospitals. We'll see care in the home. What this enables is think intuitively about the way we're tuning an LLM. If you have a device that you can yourself now tune at home, and instead of running to the hospital, now you'll have these devices, right? So we have little glimpses of that already, but I believe Gen AI is going to make a big push there. And as I mentioned before, I think we'll see much more of these interactions. So if someone is in a hospital and you see a data scientist standing next to the doctor, don't be scared, because I believe that's going to happen and much more often.
I think it's a hopeful prediction, by the way. I want to thank you for that one. Lena, what do you think? What do we have to be focusing on? And what are you focusing in on?
So I think the main focus should be on the multimodal data integration. We have so many different modalities, single cell level self-phenotyping on the one hand, and then population level data and clinical medical records on the other hand. How do we connect between the two? It is a hard problem, and I think with the emerging amounts of data of both types, the integration would be interesting. I think that working on humanized models, organoids, for example, where we can mimic patients in the lab, and doing this gene editing experiments where we turn on genes, turn off genes, play with that, and learn about how cells react, and then apply this machine learning model to bridge and understand how this translates into patients. These are the main challenges, but I think the main advantages that will happen during the next couple of years.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you, Lena. Thank you. I want to thank the three of you for sharing your wisdom with our listeners today. Obviously, we had a few hundred log into this. We'll have hundreds, if not thousands, more watching this. It has been recorded. That recording will be shared publicly, of course, and people will be able to benefit from your knowledge in the days, weeks, and months ahead. I don't want to say years any longer, because we're moving so quickly with this technology. I think that in a month or two, obviously you'll be working on very different things and would have very different advice. For that reason, I ask all of our participants to follow you on X, formerly known as Twitter, on LinkedIn. You've welcomed those follows and direct messages. There are a number of questions in the Q&A that we'll hold on to, directed at our panelists. Please take a look actually when you get the tape and make sure that you respond. I want to thank our participants, of course, for listening in, your enthusiasm for this conversation. Most importantly, I want to thank our organizers, the assistance of Cullen Burnell, who helped us put this together, and Levi Shapiro, who is the host and organizer of the Global Health Innovation Community. Thank you all. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.